Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy episode of 114. Now, this is the show where we talk about all things AWS, about generative AI, interview folks in the AWS community. My name is Stephen Barr.
Hi everyone, I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and we have a very special guest today.
We
have Arleif with us. Arleif, you want to just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Arleif Braganza. Live in Melbourne and love AWS. Loving Amplify. You'll hear more about it.
Awesome. Today we've got actually so many time zones covered in this particular call. We've gone all the way from Australia to Seattle and India in the middle.
Well, it's so good to have you, Arleif. We worked together. When I was in Australia, it was nice to be in the same time zone, but like I said, we make it work now. All right. I wanted to set the stage. Last week, we were talking about productivity, about OKRs, and of course, about generative AI, how we can tie that all together. And I did a quick demo. I want to share my screen quickly and show what I was doing. And just to set the stage, let's see if I can present my screen. Where did my screen go? Oh, here it is. Okay. So setting the stage, I have this UI here. Now I want to look at my tasks and then look at how my OKRs map to those tasks. So I could say load OKRs into context. And this is using Claude 3.5 Sonnet on Bedrock. Now, this is using Claude tools. So it's figuring out, okay, I'm going to load the OKRs. In this case, it's just reading a local YAML file. Now, I don't want to show my personal OKRs and my to-do list, so I have them based on Michael Scott. So, do you see? And see, I tried to zoom in and my UI broke. But you can see the OKRs here. Boost office morale through through unconventional team building, increase paper sales, and personal growth and recognition as the world's best boss. I can list my tasks. And what it's doing here, the backend is a tool called ClickUp. Now, we don't have any official affiliation with them. It's a neat tool that I like. It has a nice API. Then the cool thing is I've got the API hooked up to the Claude agent. So it will list all these tasks for me. And then I can use Claude to plan out my tasks. So, for example, set the new catchphrases task to urgent priority. And so I didn't have to spell anything right. It's going to figure out what tool to use and how to do it. So that was a quick demo of this. Now, one shortcoming, as you can see, is that the UI is pretty leaves a lot to be desired. I personally don't mind a command line interface. You can see, there we go. It set the task to urgent. UI leaves a lot to be desired. Now, on the UI side, we had talked about Amplify. Now, Arleif, let's talk about AWS Amplify. Now, when that originally came out, I think it came out a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
That was Gen 1. Yeah.
Gen 1. But we are now in Amplify 2. So I tried Amplify Gen 1 when it came out. I think I'm not a front-end person. I know HTML1, and that's about where it stopped for me. So I found Amplify 1 tricky to use. I found it was very slow to iterate. The idea was it would build up a DynamoDB backend. But in Amplify 2, I think they've taken a lot of the feedback. So, Arleif, you've been using Amplify 2 for a while now. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, for one, it just works. I think that was for me the key driver. There are very few clicks. You go to the Amplify console. There is a console now where you go to do everything. You don't have to leave it and go to logs and all that kind of stuff. One place, very easy integration with a repository in GitHub or other places. And then you get from nothing to a full-fledged front-end, back-end database in 5 minutes. And most of those 5 minutes are just waiting for CloudFormation to do its stuff. But you get there. So that was for me a key driver. It's easy to get started, and then it just works. And then from there you go incrementally add stuff to your application.
Yeah. I'd add a couple of other things that I really love about Amplify. And just for the record, Arleif has been teaching me a whole lot of stuff about Amplify and turning me into a huge Amplify fan as well. But the couple of things that really stood out for me was one, no dealing with any IAM or policies or trying to figure out how to get one system to talk to another. If you actually look at the number of resources Amplify creates, not paid resources, but just structural resources like AWS roles and service roles, policies, all that stuff under the hood, there's tons of it. But the beauty for an end user trying to use Amplify is that you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It just gets created, gets modified, gets updated depending on what you're trying to do. Whether it be Cognito, whether it be DynamoDB, whether it be AppSync for the GraphQL API, or whatever is required for your front end to be hosted, deployed, different sandbox environments, everything is available without you having to worry about any of the underlying details about how that is getting deployed. And I think that simplification is really neat.
So zooming out for a second, so I guess what's the scope of Amplify? So you're saying it can basically be the entire front end and back end of a fully functioning web app, including user authentication, including database, including API. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you can think of it as at the core a data model. Everything revolves around your data model. You've got a data model, you've got a basic API to interact with it. Inbuilt is a GraphQL API, but you could build REST and other stuff as well. And then there's the CI/CD pipelines that enable you to actually deploy that from your GitHub repository. And then you can add on a UI and a lot of other things. You can have storage like on S3, connected with streams, but it's like an onion. At the core is the data model and all these things around it. So the scope is it's unlimited in the sense that you can have a simple CRUD based application, you can have event driven applications, microservices, monoliths, a lot of things around that data model.
Yeah. I think, the data model is kind of very core and central to how this stuff could be leveraged. Like, for example, I may not go to Amplify as my first choice to build a chat app that talks to, either Bedrock or OpenAI's API. That's not the first thing that I would go to it for, but any CRUD app where the first thing I think about is, oh, this is how I want to store the data. Here's my data model. And then I want an app built on top of the data model where I'm going to store data, retrieve it, do a bunch of operations on it, maybe even chain stuff together. So I may use OpenAI or Claude or Bedrock or whatever as a secondary operation on all that data. That's totally fine. But at the core or at the heart is that data model.
Well, I think you've touched on what's made Amplify, at least for me, what I can see is really exciting about a path forward is now we have generative AI. And so how have you been using generative AI on your Amplify journey? And this is a question to both of you.
Arleif, if you want to go first?
Sure. Obviously, the in-ID copilots, I think that's an obvious part of the answer. Those generative AI components help me write my Amplify code as well as the other React code or any other functions I'm writing. But then you can take what you have, which is the GraphQL API that Amplify builds for you, and you can start to do very interesting things with it, whether it's REST or GraphQL. And I think Rahul can talk more about that.
Yeah. So I think from my standpoint, the LLMs have really unleashed a huge capability of adopting new technologies a lot faster. So TypeScript is very new to me. I haven't spent much time learning the language or using it extensively. So I am a newbie when it comes to TypeScript. And I'm also a newbie when it comes to React. Now, Amplify 2, unfortunately, is very TypeScript centric. You need to kind of do everything within TypeScript. And AI has kind of removed that barrier or that friction when it comes to getting stuff done. Fundamentally, I understand TypeScript structure, but when it comes to syntax and all of that stuff and making sure everything is right, the AI, the in IDE, LLMs that or copilots that Arleif was talking about are incredible, because if you just say what you want to get done, it does it for you, and you've got all the syntax and stuff that's just made correct by default. Now, they can get a lot better. The LLMs don't have everything around Amplify 2 yet in them to know all the patterns and stuff like that, but I expect that in another 3-4 months, that'll be 10x better. On the flip side of it, React is something that I generally struggle with a lot. UI, UX components, knowing which library to use, knowing which parameters to use. LLMs have definitely helped a ton in making that much easier. But I've discovered this new hack, and we're going to talk about that today, where I use Claude 3.5 Sonnet to generate live React components that I can play with, interact with. And with the GraphQL endpoints that the system generates, that Amplify 2 generates, we can just literally just say, here's the schema, here's the endpoint, give me a UI that does this. And you can literally in chat change the UI and UX to the way you want to see it and work with it. And it's pretty incredible. So hopefully today we'll demonstrate some of that stuff, and hopefully the audience will find some of that useful.
Yeah, I think we should jump right in. I know my fear with React is that since I'm not part of the JavaScript ecosystem, I don't know it very well, and so I get stuck in this analysis paralysis, and I end up on Reddit for 4 or 5 hours. Just should I do this? Should I do this? What path should I take? And I don't have a good framework for evaluating it. I know I want to do React, but then of course with web frameworks, there's always a new abstraction on top of the next abstraction. And so it's hard for me to just pick a path and go with it. And so I think
the thing that I like about
doing that,
the thing that I like about Amplify is that because you get a starter app with all the scaffolding ready to go right out of the box, you have a starting point over there, and then you can keep modifying it to what suits you the most. And that's, I think, the thing that overcomes that paralysis of trying to figure out what is the right framework and how to get started. Here, there's no decision to be made. The decision is made for you, and I love that opinionated call.
Well, it's worth mentioning that we talked about React, TypeScript. Amplify 2 is very opinionated compared with 1, but it's more opinionated on the back end compared with the front end. On the back end, you have to use TypeScript for your functions, for your resolvers, etc. Technically, you can write them in other languages as well and use CDK, which is a really great decision that Amplify, AWS made with Amplify 2. They put all the opinionated decisions into Amplify and said, well, you have to use only TypeScript. Unlike 1 that allowed you to do things in YAML and all different languages. But at the same time, they didn't clip CDK's wings, in the sense that Amplify sits on top of CDK, and you can still use CDK to do everything else and deploy Python-based functions and all of that stuff. When it comes to the UI, it is React centric in the sense that there is more tooling for React, but it's not opinionated. You could use any framework. You don't even need to use JavaScript, TypeScript. What Amplify does for you there is package your UI, put it onto S3, have CloudFront, custom domains, all of that. As long as you can give it a build and deploy command for your UI, whether you use server-side rendering or single-page applications or static websites, and whatever framework you use on the UI, doesn't matter. Amplify does have libraries and SDKs for multiple frameworks, but most of the demos and even their the UI to code component auto generation is, you see more of React there, but they actually do support other frameworks.
Yeah. So why don't we jump right in? Today we are going to actually start with the sample application. Arleif, if you can share your screen and we can dive right into it. Let's pull up the sample application and look at what that does. So this is the sample to-do application. There's a getting started guide for Amplify. If you just follow the basic steps, it takes about 5 to 7 minutes to get this set up and deployed. It's really simple to do that. I love the instructions. I love the details that are in there. I've been neck deep in some of these manuals over the last few days as I've been trying to use it for another project. And the data and examples and code snippets are really neat over here. So this is basically, we created the standard to-do app. And let's pull up the getting started guide.
I guess my screen is shared right now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you see the getting started guide. So sorry, I'll open up the.
Let's pull up the getting started guide here. Yeah. So this is how you. You should please make sure to go to Amplify Gen 2, not Gen 1. And once you go over there, if you go to the Get Started link, Arleif, or the Quick Start, yeah. So there's some very detailed instructions on how you can get started. Barely takes a few minutes. I love the animated GIFs that are in here that make it really easy to understand what the steps are, the right level of zooming, made it really straightforward to get started. And if you just follow these instructions step by step, you can get the entire to-do app deployed. If you can just pull up the to-do app, it's a really straightforward app over here. You can just say new, you can start typing out, whatever
and
you
now
want.
this has a centralized data store, so I also have this app up, and I can so I just added a new to-do on my side, and that's going to be, you're going to see that as well.
Correct.
There it is. Steven says hello. Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So all of these are available. I mean, so this is literally the default product out of the box. Okay. Now, why don't we go through the exercise of modifying this to look somewhat like your OKR solution that we were demoing just a short while ago. So let's say we had OKRs and then we had tasks that basically conform to the OKR. So when you look at the data model, we are going to start with discussing what those dependencies look like. So Arleif, can we bring up the data model?
Okay, I'll quickly walk through this. So this is the default Amplify generated from the template, the source code generated from the template. The key backend file is this one that has defined an auth module and a data module. Auth specifies simple email authentication, and the data module has a data model. You see there's only to do, it has content and some authorization. And with just this simple code, the definition of this data model, the definition just saying that I want to authenticate with email and specifying that in the backend. What Rahul was talking about earlier, Amplify has gone and created a DynamoDB table, AppSync, hooked all the IAM stuff, made sure everything can talk to each other. It's generated the Cognito user pools, all the resources in Cognito that are necessary, tied them up with DynamoDB, and all of that's done. You can even have row level, table level access control, as you can see here. All you do is set up this one line and all the Cognito stuff. All of that's done, and now we can build on top of that. And the UI is
there'll be a
here.
front end folder.
Yeah, and by saying generate client here, we get access to the backend. Amplify auto generates a simple ORM. So you're saying client.model.todo. You can observe it for real-time updates on the UI. You can use the CRUD functions here. There's create, delete, list, etc. These are just all auto-generated, and they work on top of GraphQL. Yeah, so you've got a simple UI, a simple backend with very, very little code.
So this was all part of the basic template. This wasn't generated at all.
At this point, I have written nothing, right? It's just a template. And all I did is come here and deploy that into another cool Amplify feature called a sandbox. You say
there are a bunch of commands that are available. So while Arleif is just deploying the sandbox is basically a different environment where you can play around with, and it can run off the same code, it can run off a different branch, and the sandbox basically allows you to have hot reloading, hot swaps, all of that for all your backend, front end, all of that stuff. So all you can focus on is changing your data model and a little bit of the code. Everything else gets deployed automatically behind the scenes.
Yeah, with development, you often need you need a development environment, and in this case, since it's a NoSQL database, you've got serverless functions, resolvers, and all of that stuff. Either you use something like local stack and run all of that locally, but the opinionated approach that Amplify takes is to give you this ability to run a sandbox. They deploy all of the backend for me as a developer against my identifier that I specified here, which is just a name, in AWS. And the UI that you can see running here is connecting to that AWS backend. There's nothing running on my computer besides the npm run dev UI, that's localhost. Everything else is in AWS. And as I edit my functions or my backend or the configurations, it'll go in, and whatever can be hot reloaded, like Lambda functions can be hot reloaded. They hot reload them. If the stack needs to be redeployed, it redeploys the stack. And I don't leave this terminal. I don't have to go to the AWS console to do things. I can even see logs and everything here.
Yeah,
It's
the
amazing
seamless management under the hood is amazing. It's absolutely fantastic.
And even work, like the iteration time used to be so slow on Amplify 1. And sometimes you try to iterate on a branch and everything would break. And you'd have to restart everything. This is incredible to see this. This is really cool. I'm excited to try this out.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we build out the OKR model?
Okay.
And see how this automatically gets set up. So we've set up the sandbox over here, right? We have all the endpoints and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and let's build out the model. So we're going to have an OKR. So why don't you describe the model, Stephen?
Sure. Okay. Well, in an OKR, I'm going to look at the OKR model. So an OKR, as I'm visualizing it, it has a tag ID, so that's some identifier. It has a text objective. And so in this case, Michael Scott's first objective was dramatically increase office morale through unconventional team building activities.
Got it.
Then it has, I also have another string that's called initiatives, which is, I think it's more of the actions associated with those OKRs. So things like organize office parties was a Michael initiative for office morale. And then I have key results. So I have a list of key results, and key results are measurable. So each key result has its own identifier. It has a description. So one of them is, for example, execute 6 elaborate themed office days. And so I put the frequency as bi-weekly, meaning I want to see progress on that KR on a bi-weekly basis.
Got it.
So that's my OKR status. And then I have it in that repository in a YAML file.
Okay. So we've got this. So key
Wow.
results should just have a title and metrics, right? Nothing else.
Yeah.
Or
Key
title and
results has
description should
a
be fine.
title, description. I put a frequency in there, but that's I haven't used that in my own
Frequency,
personal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Frequency is
This is a string.
a string. Okay.
Yeah. So it's how often do I want to show progress against that result?
We can remove the target. We can remove progress. Okay, progress is fine. And the OKR belongs to, yeah, we'll have to have an OKR ID, and then this will be a string. ID is a string here. And this belongs to model is OKR, and the ID in there is the OKR ID.
Okay,
OKR
so this
ID.
line 28, this is defining the one-to-many relationship between OKRs and key results.
That is correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
So whether you have a one-to-many, many-to-many, you're going to have to define those relationships for it. And once you define these relationships, everything else that is needed, is automatically generated for you.
Now, I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but could Claude may have been able to also do this part?
Yeah, there's a bunch of autocomplete. Just that Amplify 2's documentation isn't that well.
Oh, I see. So you need to have a prompt with an example of saying, here's a mapping between in my case, a pydantic model and an Amplify 2 model.
Correct.
And then you can.
I think the parameters are swapped, Arleif.
Yeah, I keep forgetting this.
First you have the model, and then you have the ID. There, you got post and ID. Yep. So it's got to be the other way around. So it's going to be OKR, and then you've got OKR ID.
No, I think this is right.
Yeah, you're going to use the local OKR ID, not key results. You're right.
One second. Belongs to person and ID. That should work.
Yeah. So we've got OKR, then we've got key results. Everything else is a string. Actually, that's it. So we've saved this. And once we've saved it, we can look at the GraphQL endpoint.
Got rid of my terminal, so bring it back. Now I save that file. Or am I saving it now? The sandbox command that I was running got triggered to regenerate stuff. Now, if I've got something wrong in this model, it's going to tell me right there. Missing authorization.
Oh, great. So we should just authorize with public key. So that's your entire authorization model for each object.
You can do really interesting things here, like you can say authorize only the owner, allow owners to edit, delete. You can do RBAC all through simple, just one line here, and you don't need to. You're not writing code to do any of that stuff.
Right. Can we just do this? Can you just do allow dot, and then let's look at the other options that are available? That's actually pretty neat. So you can just add a list of permissions right here, So you can allow groups. So you can create groups, and you can say this is what I'm calling the group users part of a group can get access to this. You can do public API key. You can do authenticated. That means any authenticated user is allowed to access this. So there are tons of combinations that you could apply to this data model.
So, okay, so you could have a commenter and an editor and a reviewer, and each of them could edit certain fields or not, depending on their
Correct.
role. Like you said,
Yes.
it's actually proper RBAC, role-based
Correct.
control.
And also rows. You can expose, for example, if you say owner here, it's going to associate every row with the person who created it, which is the owner, and then that person only sees rows that they have created.
Yeah. So, for example, if you wanted to-dos that were only created by you and not a common pool, then you just say allow owner. And then all retrievals, all writes have the owner tag attached to it. So it'll only pull up the to-dos from the owner.
Or maybe I could see everybody's to-dos, but I could only edit my own.
You can do that as well. And you can specify operations for which you want to grant specific kinds of permissions as well.
That is really neat.
Okay, so we've got all of this. Shall we take a look at the GraphQL?
Yeah. So as my sandbox deploys, I get this Amplify outputs file that has everything it has deployed for me. And what I'm looking for is AppSync here. So I can go to AppSync.
Actually, you can just copy and paste that URL. Okay. Actually, I can bring that up here as well.
Okay, so this is in the Amazon console, and now you're looking at the GraphQL
endpoint
that you just updated this data model. And so now we're looking at, okay, so with GraphQL, the neat thing is you can have this relational data, and it will figure out the exact query to get you the kind of to move the minimum amount of data possible to fulfill the fields that you're asking for. Is that right? Is that kind of the promise of GraphQL?
I would say there are two parts. One is when you're querying the data. So GraphQL has a very fundamentally different implementation behind the scenes. Okay. The idea is that to query it's not just limited to one data set. Under the hood, you can actually have GraphQL federate out a bunch of different queries to multiple different systems, bring them all together into one single object model, and only return the fields that you've specifically asked for. And so the implementation mechanism of GraphQL is very, very different. It's just a standard, and you can have all kinds of different implementations for how that actually executes. They have a very interesting concept of a query, a mutation, and resolvers and subscribers. Mutations basically change the data. Queries query the data and get you what you need. Subscriptions can basically subscribe to events in the system and then act accordingly. And a resolver is a custom piece of code that tells the system how to, solve for a particular kind of query or mutation.
Got it. Okay, so I could have a users table that's in somewhere durable, but then I could have a recommended item table that maybe comes from a custom machine learning solution that I've made. And at the resolver time, it can fill in that field.
Correct.
Yeah, you could even think of it in, you can think of your data model as encompassing more than just your data. For example, let's say you start looking at OpenAI as a source of data, right? You ask it a question, you get a response, and that's data. You can build in your data model here, you can define a function called getAnswer, right? Or answer would be your data model, and you would then build a resolver that Rahul referred to. It would show up here as getAnswer, and the implementation of getAnswer would be a function that I write in code, which actually calls OpenAI and gets the answer at real time. So it's not talking to DynamoDB. Now, in these cases, OKR and to-do list, because I define them as DynamoDB models here, they have been implemented in DynamoDB. But I can define other things. We probably won't go into that today. It's a good topic for another day. You can define other sorts of data entities and have them implemented to go get data from other places.
Got it.
Okay, so next, let's do this. You were just showing your screen, Arleif, where you had GraphQL, and you can basically run queries and you can get back data. Now, this is a query. You can add a mutation as well, but this is a little painful, right? I mean, this API is actually great, but to actually write data into the database is a little tricky. So let's do something a little more interesting. By the way, if you just check this code into GitHub, the system will automatically pick it up. And because Amplify 2 is set up to deal with, set up to look at GitHub events, as soon as you check this into main, because you set up main as the branch to act on, it will go ahead and deploy this to the other environment or the main environment that we have. So really, really simple to do all of this stuff. Let's take a look at creating a quick UI for all of this stuff. Arleif, can you just tell me what is the AppSync, the GraphQL endpoint that we are using over here?
For my sandbox?
Yeah, let's just do the sandbox.
Since I've pushed this to main, you should be able to use the
main as well?
The main one, yeah. This
okay,
one.
Great.
It will take a few minutes to deploy, obviously, but
yeah, what is the GraphQL endpoint look like?
It's the same one you had earlier. Let me find it.
So in the AppSync, I have two of them. One is your main and one is the sandbox. I just need to know which one is the main and which is the sandbox.
One. So in this list, the third one is main.
Okay, great. Awesome. And do we have any? We are not using any key. This is all publicly available.
You will see the API key on the same page. Okay. You do need to use this key.
Okay, perfect. So we do need to use this key, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The key has got stars in here as I'm looking at this.
If you copy this, I think it will have the.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to share my screen over here and walk through a quick demo of the way I've been using.
Well, how about this? Why don't we take a 2-minute break to get set up, and we come back, we will be ready to show you how you can use this GraphQL endpoint with Claude to build custom components for this. Well,
awesome.
2-minute break. We'll be right back.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.
Here we go. We are back. Now, this is part 2. So, to summarize what happened in part 1, we had created an Amplify-based data model for OKRs.
Correct.
Now, we had tried using Claude's UI to interact with Amplify, giving it the API key, everything else, but we ran into this problem. Now, what exactly was the problem? We couldn't, it was called the CSR?
Yeah. So the content security policy, CSPs.
CSP.
Yeah. So what it did was, so Claude Anthropic decided to lock down the Claude interface, where if an app was generated in the sandbox, they basically stopped its ability to call out to any external endpoints or any external API. And it was quite a bummer because that's an incredibly powerful feature of the artifacts that we were starting to really leverage in Claude. So what we decided to do is we decided to go back and look at whether there were any other solutions out there. And there were quite a few, actually. We found Llama Coda to be one of those solutions that was available. However, it was lacking in a few features, and it had a very custom backend that it relied on. So instead, what we did was we took out the backend. We kept some of the front-end functionality of Llama Coda, but enhanced it with some of the things that we needed. For example, we needed to be able to upload other attachments as contexts to the LLM. We also wanted to be able to connect it to GPT 4.0 or any other OpenAI model, or connect it to any of the Bedrock models as we saw necessary. So by swapping out that backend with our approach to trying out every model that's out there to find the best solution, we made a few tweaks and adapted that code base. And so we created a new artifacts tool that would allow us a very similar functionality to what Claude 3.5 has.
And we also found the libraries, the restriction on the libraries very constraining. So we've allowed more libraries to be used, even MUI for better looking stuff, Axios for making requests, etc. Because without that, the tool was very handicapped.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you can tell any LLM to create a web component, and it can make the calls right there from the tool. You don't need to copy and paste it. And even if you're calling to an outside service, that's okay, because
Correct.
we didn't make this for the use case that Anthropic is developing, right? Where they don't want to become an app server for millions and millions and millions of people.
Correct. So why don't we jump right into it?
Let's put it on. There it is.
There we go. Okay. So this is our UI. What we're going to do is, if you remember, we actually created a schema JSON file. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the schema JSON into this. And I have a prompt over here that I'll walk you through. So all we are saying is create an app that allows all the CRUD operations on the OKRs. Okay. Now remember, I'm not telling it what OKRs are. I'm not telling it, it'll just pick up the schema and the context to understand everything there is to understand about OKRs. And then I just say use the GraphQL endpoints that we had. So I gave it the endpoint and I gave it the API key. Of course, by the time this airs, we will have toned this down. So don't waste your time trying to use this endpoint or the key. But and then I just said use the attached GraphQL schema. And then here right now, we've not fed it with the two, like GPT-4 tends to move towards Tailwind and Apollo for GraphQL and Tailwind for rendering it. So right now, we've not introduced those two libraries into it. We absolutely can quite easily. But I just got a directive to say do not use Apollo or Tailwind CSS. Now let's see what it does. Now this part takes a few seconds to run. So we'll give it that much time, but it's really that simple. Everything that we required in the context is present in the schema JSON that we just downloaded from from AppSync. Yeah.
Okay, so you've packaged up into one message the prompt plus the attached context, the schema.json, and now you can call the API, the LLM. This could be on Amazon Bedrock. This could be direct to, in this case, OpenAI with GPT-4o.
Yeah. So we have all the GPT models in here, and we have Cloud 3.5 Sonnet, and we intend to add more of the Bedrock models in here over the next week or so. So we intend this to be a very, very handy internal tool that any business user can use to actually, perform interesting custom functionality against the API that are made available. You're going to have to wait for a few more seconds. Hopefully this will come up.
And so I see it's made a variable for your API, for your API key.
Yeah,
it's
so
using
it uses all of that.
React.
And it also creates the data model right here. Give it 1 second for it to render because it's doing all the installs. But yeah, the code does everything you need it to do. And it's available for you to download as well. And here, you have a simple UI that does everything that we need. Now, we were playing around with this a little earlier, so we added some objects in here, but let's delete a couple. So I can delete this one. There it goes.
Okay, so that delete button, it's not just vanishing from the UI. This is actually calling GraphQL with the actual delete.
Absolutely. So let's create another one. Give me an example of an OKR. Or give me a title for the OKR.
Produce awesome content.
Great. Description?
That's a good question.
Goal.
Like Linus Tech Tips.
Content that is as viral as LTT. Okay. Objective.
Let's see. Let's just say
hit 1 million subscribers.
There you go. 1 million subs.
Okay. What initiative are we doing?
This is going to be called the video. This is called.
How about this? Initiative LLMs to generate videos.
All right.
Okay. And I can just hit create OKR. And there it is. Produce awesome content. It's right there. And if I wanted to edit it, I can just hit the edit button. It comes up over here. Let's say by August 31st.
31st. There we go. All right.
Great. I can update the OKR. Now see, the button changed from create OKR to update OKR. All of that functionality, I didn't have to do a single thing. Now let's say I wanted a refresh button at the top right. So what I can do is I can just say, please add a refresh button on the top right corner to refresh the list of OKRs. Again, we'll just have to wait for a couple of seconds. Okay, so it's bringing back the next version of the code. It's installing all the libraries and recreating the sandbox over here. So it takes a few moments.
Okay, so it recreates the sandbox with each iteration?
Correct.
Wow, okay.
And there you have it. So we have the refresh button here that calls the backend API. And it refreshes the list over here. We don't need it because it kind of automatically does it every time we submit everything. This is GraphQL as well. So it's actually pretty neat. What other functionality would you like to have?
Why don't we... Could we sort the OKRs alphabetically?
We actually didn't say ascending or descending. Let's see what it comes up with.
And the question is it going to sort them client side, or is it going to come up with a request to sort them in the query?
Let's see, the code is here. So why don't we go take a look?
That looks alphabetical. BPT.
Yeah, it is
Okay.
alphabetical. Why don't we add another one and see where it places it? Let's call this one, what do you want to call it?
Call it distribute content. And let's just put in some examples for that. X and YouTube and Twitter.
Okay, objective.
We'll do the same thing. 1 million subs. LLM enhanced generated content. All right, let's see if this works.
Let's see where it puts it. Fingers crossed. There we go. Okay, now let's find another alphabet.
Let's see. I guess make one with a Y. YouTube button.
Domination.
There you go. So that should be at the very end.
Sure. Objective, again, 1 million subs. We'll leave the initiative blank.
There it is at the end.
There it is, right at the very end.
So did this modify the GraphQL query, or what happened?
I think it did. So let's look at the list query. So the fetch. Okay. And here you go, sorted OKRs. It actually just did it over here.
Oh, okay. So it just did it locally.
Just did it locally. So it got all the OKRs, and then it used Axios to post, and then it just sorted them locally when it got it.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
So a question for both of you, Rahul and Arleif. How do you see, if you were a younger developer and you're just starting out and you have access to this tool, how would this have changed your development experience?
Arleif, you want to go first?
Well, I think it's a great way to not start from scratch, which is deceptively slow. You always think, yeah, I'm going to have something running in a few minutes, and then that turns into a few days sometimes. Having a ramp, a takeoff ramp that's like this is very beneficial in my view. It's also great when you don't know a framework or a programming language, or in this case, there's a lot happening here. There's GraphQL, there's subscriptions, there's your normal GraphQL queries, there's basic UI, and it takes time to get all of that together. Everything wired up together and working nicely. And when you have something that's working and then you start just tweaking it, that's so much faster.
Well, Rahul, what about you?
Yeah.
How would this have changed your development experience if you were just starting?
I think I'm fully aligned with what Arleif just said, because I am terrible with frameworks like React and particularly the modern UI frameworks. Not really very good at it. And then when you have so many new technologies that are right there, whether it be Amplify with GraphQL, with all kinds of authentication mechanisms and stuff like that, trying to figure out the right approach to doing this is really hard. And this just jumpstarts everything. I can start with this tweak code. I find that as a developer, if I generally have good fundamentals, I can tweak code a lot faster than generate it or create it from scratch. And that is, I think, where the skills, my skills would be better used to figure out exactly what I need and tweak the setup accordingly. But all the boilerplate basic stuff that has to be there with all the best practices baked in, I think the LLMs are far better at getting that done right.
Yeah, no, I completely agree as well. I'm thinking about my tendency as a programmer. So I'm really lazy. And so I want to make the most general approach possible. And I might end up over engineering it or overgeneralizing, trying to come up with some really cool data model that encapsulates all of my use cases, and spend all this time writing the meta tool that can then organize the tooling to do its job, and maybe never be as productive as I want to be. But for this, it actually helps me to, you can write a component that maybe will get used for a couple of days, or might not have much of a lifetime at all, and you won't feel like you wasted time because it only took you a few seconds, and you can still get a lot of use out of it.
Yeah, I would say this could also be useful for things that where you don't know what the end outcome really needs to be, and this is a great experimental or experimentation tool that can help you arrive at your final answer. Like if you're really struggling with the UI and UX of your tool and trying to figure out how to best present it to the customers, then this is a great way to get started. Try it out, play around with it, give it to others to use. We built a publish functionality over here where we can literally take this from here and then go ahead and publish the app, where others can also use it once published. But you can iterate on it very, very quickly based on the feedback, and you're not sitting and modifying code from scratch every single time.
Yeah, there are quite a few methods of iterating here. You can iterate through the prompt and with the LLM,
Yeah.
like you just saw. You can edit text in that window on the left and see it change on the right. You can click on the sandbox button, then it opens up in a proper
Yeah.
sandbox environment, which is, some developers will really enjoy that. And then you basically can download the entire project and work from there. Or you can take this and say, hey LLM, make this into a component that I can then take and make and add to my existing application, where if you're using an in IDE copilot like tool that can see the rest of your code, that tool can look at this code and modify it to conform with the standards, the practices, and that you're following in your other code base. And you can just keep adding things to an existing code base as well this way. So yeah, those quick iterations are valuable. Figma is great for, or Figma like tools are great for the UI, right? You can quickly change stuff and see what looks good. But when it comes to interaction, when you want to build UX and you want to see what's a good interaction, what's a good table format here, what's a good user experience, those things often you have to experience them to make that decision. You can't do that in Figma. You can do it here.
Yeah.
That's something, as you use the program and you realize, well, this button should be over here, and here's a slow point in the UI if I'm going to use it this way. And then that's what you can iterate on quickly, because you're not so married to the design that you spent hours crafting by hand in Figma. You can
Exactly.
you have it right there ready to go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and if you're as lazy as I am, you don't even have to think of a solution, right? So you can just say, here's a slow point in my workflow, come up with some options to solve
Correct.
it.
And
Nope.
the nice thing about this thing, by the way, the other thing that this tool can actually do is when it comes to GPT-4o and Sonnet, the nice thing about those two LLMs is that they can analyze images. Unfortunately, Llama 3.1 can't, but GPT-4o and 3.5 Sonnet can do that. So you can literally give it a napkin sketch, or you could give it your Figma UI and say, make the UI look like this. And it can actually do a pretty amazing job of replicating that as well. So you just upload the image and say, make it look like this.
That's really neat. So you could literally draw it out. If you're working on a program with your kids, you can say, let's just draw this out on our little sketchbook, on our graph paper. This is how you want it to look. And then boom, you don't have to spend, an unlimited amount of time trying to figure out how does the CSS and the grid and the boxes work to actually make it happen. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the limits of complexity? I mean, right now we have 4 text fields. Could you have 100 or 1,000? How many fit in the context window of these modern LLMs?
So I think the largest, I think when you have multiple boxes and stuff like that in a UI, that's a terrible UX choice or a terrible UI to actually have. However, I'd say I would flip the question to ask how much or how large a schema can this handle to generate whatever UI is useful. And I'd say the largest one we've tried has, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was about 35 megs of a JSON file. If I remember correctly, it was a huge schema with multiple different objects. And I think the capacity right now is about 50 megs per. Or actually, no, I correct myself. It all depends on the context window size. The context window size is 128K, but GPT-4o can take in much larger files up to 50 megs each.
Okay. So it doesn't all have to fit in the context window. It can fit in the. How is it different? Is it like an attachment? Okay.
Yeah, I think so GPT-4o could treat it like a RAG and kind of do piecemeal. I don't know how accurate that gets. If you can fit the entire JSON schema in context in one shot, that'd be the best. This schema, for example, let's see how big this schema was. This schema
shouldn't be too large.
This one should be small. Oh wait, let's do the get info. This schema was about 221 KB.
Okay.
Yeah. Not very large, but a couple megs, should be very, very comfortable to fit into context.
Yeah, and we also need to remember that you may not need to give it an entire schema because you're not generally generating an application that's going to use the whole schema. And B, unless it's a custom schema that LLMs don't know about. For example, you wanted to talk to Zendesk or Salesforce, we don't need to give it the schema, right? It can just, you only need to give it the endpoint and the key.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, right? You shouldn't need to have your application talk to every single data model at once. That would definitely be an anti-pattern.
Correct.
And so you could break it down into components saying, okay, right now we're working with the OKRs, later we'll work with the tasks. Maybe we have another one for different visualizations or graphs. Actually, that's a good question. So speaking about visualizations, could you have it visualize, like say if we had a to-do list and we wanted to have a Gantt chart, is that something we could generate?
Absolutely. And this has what are called React charts as a library that's available to it, and it can absolutely generate all of those kinds of visualizations. We built a bunch of very interesting visualizations based on this. And it's really straightforward for it to render this. At the end of the day, this is just a React component it's rendering. And charts, it knows how to render React charts really well. One other trick that I'd like to share is when it comes to really complex UIs, one approach that's worked for us is we've had separate prompts build out each component kind of independently. So for example, this might be your OKR management component. You might have another component called a dashboard, which might be independent. You can download the TSX, so download the code for those two separately. And you can create a third dashboard or a third widget where you say, take these two components and showcase them in a new UI as two different tabs in a master UI. And the LLM finds it much easier to do that rather than generate because when you're dealing with single prompts and tweaking those prompts, taking one single prompt and getting it to do a very complex thing right across multiple different functionalities is really hard. So you might as well focus on narrow pieces of functionality and then stitch them together in a third prompt if you need to.
That makes a lot of sense. So you don't get these. Do you remember the old Visual Basic interfaces where you'd have 15 radio buttons and 6 drop downs and a bunch of text fields? You don't want all of that all at once. You could have a few focus things with different tabs for different contexts.
Exactly. It also lends it well to the component-wise thinking or a component-level thinking, where you think this is one component, this is the other component, then you think about how I'm going to put it all together in a larger UI context.
Got it. Well, here, I guess another question for Arleif, since you are a guest, wanted to ask you, when you were using LLMs, what was like the first moment where you're like, wow, this is different. This is really cool. Like, what was the task that it did that finally for you transformed it from maybe something interesting, just like, okay, this is a productivity changer?
Interestingly, to me, it was when LLMs met workspace level work. And when you say productivity, I'm assuming you're asking the question from a development standpoint. So I'll answer from that standpoint. Um, for example, when Copilot or Cursor or any of these tools really did the @ workspace well, and when you could ask the LLM questions across your entire workspace rather than just one file that you could see or and struggle to find all the context and give it to that, that's when it really opened up things. For example, even what we were talking about here, you, like Rahul said, you copy the app.tsx and you paste it in that window and say, make this, take inspiration from this, make it a component in my existing app and make sure it's like all my other components are. And you can do that right in your IDE window. That's really cool, and it wasn't something that was available early on with the LLMs.
Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense, right? Where you can actually work at production scale.
Yeah, you can say things like, where in my code base is this decision made, because I have this bug and I think it's happening wherever this sort of logic is happening, and how do I fix it? And now it's going to go out, look through your entire code base, find that, tell you what it changed. That's interesting. It's a long way from just generating code from scratch. Now, generating code from scratch, like we just saw, is great for prototyping. It's great for certain things, but when you need to scale, you really have to operate on existing code bases, often large ones.
Yeah. One of the experiments I ran recently was I had this tool kind of generate a TSX file, an app component like this. But if you can see the code, let's bring that up again. If you see the code, everything is in one file, right? The models are right there. The API calls that are being made are all right there. And not the way we would typically organize our UI code base, right? You want the APIs to be in a separate file. You just want the UI components to be in one place that are rendered, the stuff at the bottom. And so I took this code and I said, refactor it according to this design where we have API in one place, we have, the rendered components in one place and so on. And it just went ahead and did it. It did it beautifully.
So did you have a tool then that would split it into different files that it could output, or how did it?
This is in the IDE now. You have cursor.sh, you have
Okay.
Copilots, you have all of these tools that now can handle all of this stuff very, very comfortably.
That is really neat. Okay, I'll have to try. Is it cursor.sh?
Yeah, you could do Cursor, which is an IDE. Seems like it's built on Visual Studio Code, but it's got a lot of very interesting LLM integrations baked into it. Or even
GitHub
GitHub
Copilot.
Copilot, Code Whisperer, or formerly Code Whisperer now, Q can do a really good job too.
I'm going to see if there's an Emacs plugin, but I'm afraid I will have to give.
You
Cursor
might just have to,
well.
yeah. I think you might just have to give up Emacs for this.
It is a shame that LLMs, they're not great at generating Lisp.
Yeah, there isn't that much Lisp code around anymore.
Well, and there's a lot of really esoteric Lisp code that are using libraries that were dead 20 years ago. So
correct.
Yeah, not as great training data.
Exactly.
Neat. Well, this was really interesting. It's great to see how there was, as they say, necessity was the mother of invention. We needed this tool, ran into this showstopper with the Claude UI.
Literally a showstopper.
So we're able to take a moment, pause. There was a couple of days gap in which you developed this really neat tool where now for internal developers, we can iterate on components quickly, call APIs and do that securely. I love how you showed the sandbox. That was really neat.
Yeah, a huge shout out to the developers of LLM Coda. I think they did a bunch of very interesting work and open sourced their
Llama
tool.
Coda.
Sorry, Llama Coda, not LLM Coda. This is Llama Coda. And yeah, I think we were able to benefit from a lot of the pre-work that they had put in and modify it to our use case and our needs. So a huge shout out to them.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. This was a really fun show, and please stay tuned for more usage of LLMs for developing, for productivity, for organization, and of course, more AWS cost optimization. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.